The studio lights were bright enough to make anyone squint, and when the host called for a volunteer from the audience, most people shrank in their seats. But an elderly woman sitting near the middle row wasn't quick enough to look away. The camera caught her gentle face, framed with soft gray hair, and in that moment, the host pointed toward her with a playful grin that wasn't entirely kind. "Let's bring her up. She looks like she's got a fun surprise for us," he said loudly, and the audience laughed, not because they knew her, but because they expected something silly was about to happen. The woman's heart fluttered in her chest. She didn't like attention, and she definitely didn't like being put on the spot. But she also didn't want to cause trouble or say no. So she slowly got up, holding her small purse close, and started making her way down the stairs toward the stage. The host walked toward her with exaggerated excitement, encouraging the crowd to cheer. She tried to smile politely, but inside she felt uneasy. She didn't know what they wanted her to do yet. She just hoped it wasn't something humiliating. When she reached the stage, she stood quietly, her hands gently folded together. The host leaned toward her with a microphone and asked her name. She told him softly, and he repeated it loudly to the audience, dragging out the syllables in a playful way that made people chuckle again. "So," he said, turning back to her, "we do a little fun game on this show. We call someone from the audience and let them try something on stage. It's all for laughs, of course." He winked at the camera, then looked back at her. "How about you play a little tune on the piano for us? Just a few notes. Nothing complicated." He pointed toward a grand piano sitting under a spotlight. It looked polished, impressive, and intimidating. The woman's throat tightened. She hadn't touched a piano in years, not publicly. At least, and she could already sense the audience's expectation that she would stumble or press the wrong keys. Somewhere in the crowd, she heard snickering. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. People whispered, guessing she probably didn't know anything about music, imagining her hitting random keys while everyone laughed. The host pretended to be encouraging, but his smile wasn't warm. "Come on, just have a little fun. We love surprises on this show." She took a slow breath. She didn't feel insulted so much as uncomfortable. She knew they weren't asking her because they believed she could really play. They just wanted a moment that would entertain the audience at her expense, but she didn't want to appear rude or uncooperative. She had always lived quietly, politely, and she wasn't about to argue now. So she nodded faintly and took a small step toward the piano. The studio felt bigger from the stage. So many eyes, so many lights, so many cameras pointed at her. She walked slowly, carefully, trying not to trip or look uncertain, but each step felt heavy. She could hear her own breath louder than the applause. When she reached the piano bench, she paused. Her hand touched the smooth surface of the instrument, and something stirred inside her, something she had buried long ago. She remembered a much younger version of herself, sitting at a different piano, in a quieter place, playing melodies that once filled her life with purpose. But that was a long time ago. She sat down gently. Her knees weren't as strong as they used to be, so she lowered herself with care. She placed her purse beside her on the floor and looked at the keys. They gleamed under the bright lights, almost as if waiting for her. Behind her, the host whispered loudly to the audience, "This should be interesting," and laughter rolled across the room again. She heard every sound. She felt every assumption they had made about her. She placed her fingers above the keys, but she didn't press anything yet. Her hands trembled not from fear of the piano, but from the pressure of all the attention. She wished for a moment that the room would disappear, that she could be somewhere quiet, where music didn't feel like a performance, but a gentle part of life. Instead, she took another deep breath. The smell of the polished wood, the familiar touch of the keys, it all brought back distant memories. Her husband's voice came to mind, warm and supportive, telling her she had the hands of an artist. She blinked softly, steadying her breathing. The host walked closer, hovering just behind her shoulder. "Anytime you're ready," he said dramatically, as if expecting a comedic moment. She didn't respond. Her eyes stayed on the keys, trying to find confidence within herself. The audience waited, leaning forward, some with amused smiles, others ready to record the moment with their phones. She lifted her hands slightly, then rested them down again. Her fingers felt stiff, but not unfamiliar with the territory. She wanted to calm her nerves first. She wanted to remember the feeling of playing, not for entertainment, not for applause, but because it had once felt like home. The studio felt too loud, too bright, too expectant. She could hear people shifting in their seats, whispering, waiting. Some were impatient, some were curious, and some were already predicting failure. But she stayed still for a few seconds longer. She tried to gather herself, to settle the tremor in her hands and the racing in her heart. She knew that no matter what she played, even if it was simple, it had to come from a place she recognized. She glanced briefly at the audience. The faces blurred under the lights, but she could still feel their attention like a weight. She wasn't used to this. She had spent so much of her life in the background, quietly, privately, taking care of things no one else saw. And now here she was, on a brightly lit stage, being expected to provide a moment of entertainment. She lowered her eyes again. One key at a time, one breath at a time. Her right hand hovered over the middle keys, and for a moment she thought she might just press a single note and leave. That would be enough for them. Enough to get their laugh and move on. But something inside her disagreed. Something old. Something she had nearly forgotten she still had. Her fingers gently touched the first key, not pressing, just resting. And in that small contact, she felt the echo of who she used to be. She wasn't ready to play yet. But she wasn't as afraid now. She could feel the music within her, like a memory waking up slowly. Behind her, the host cleared his throat, trying to keep the moment entertaining. "Take your time," he said with a joking tone. "We're all very excited to hear your masterpiece." Laughter followed again. She didn't react. She didn't let the laughter reach her heart. Instead, she straightened her back slightly, as if remembering an old habit from her youth. When she used to practice for hours with perfect posture, her left hand settled over the lower keys. Her right hand floated above the higher ones. She finally exhaled deeply, letting go of the tension she had been holding since they called her name. She still hadn't played a single note, but something in the room began to shift. The audience, though still amused, grew quieter. They could sense she was taking this seriously, even if they didn't understand why. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the lights and the faces and the whispers. She let herself imagine she was somewhere else, somewhere peaceful, where no one judged her, where no one expected a performance. She remembered the first time she ever touched a piano, long before her hair turned gray, long before her hands grew frail. She remembered the joy, the freedom, the feeling that music wasn't sound, but emotion poured into movement. And slowly, without realizing she had done it, her trembling stopped. She opened her eyes again, calm now, focused, and though she still hadn't played. The audience began to lean in, curious in a different way. The host waited. The cameras waited. Everyone waited. Her fingers hovered, steady this time. The moment before the first note felt like the quiet before a storm, except no one in that room had any idea what the next moment would change. Ethan's fingers hovered over the piano keys, but he didn't press a single note. Something inside him froze. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the weight of all the years he had stayed away from music. Or maybe it was the quiet pressure of the intern's eyes watching him. Whatever it was, he pulled his hands back. Before he could say anything, The auditorium door swung open, and a manager called the interns over to help with equipment. They left with a few final snickers, and the room grew silent again. Ethan exhaled, slowly closed the piano lid gently, and stepped down from the stage. Leo met him halfway, worry written all over his face. "It's okay, Dad," Leo said quietly. "You don't have to play for them." Ethan smiled softly and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I know. Let's just finish up and go home." The two gathered their things, and Ethan returned to work. But something felt different now. Something had been stirred that he couldn't push down completely. As they left the building, Leo suddenly asked, "Dad, why did you stop playing the piano before?" Ethan hesitated. He didn't talk about that part of his life often. "Life got busy," he said. "A lot changed, and I had to focus on other things." "Do you miss it?" Ethan looked at his son, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't hide the truth. "Yes, I do." Leo nodded softly, as if he understood everything without needing more details. They walked home under the evening sky, the warm streetlights guiding their way. Ethan carried a quiet heaviness, but also a spark, something small, something old, something he thought was gone forever. The next morning started like any other. Ethan prepared breakfast, packed Leo's lunch, and walked him to school. But his mind wasn't completely present. Images of the piano kept flashing in his thoughts, the touch of the keys, the sound he imagined, the memories he had tried to bury. When he arrived at work, the building was already busy. Workers raced around carrying boxes and decorations for the gala. Ethan knew it would be a long day. He pushed his cart through the hallways, wiping surfaces and clearing clutter as he turned. A corner, he heard laughter coming from a group of employees gathered near the break area. It didn't bother him. People laughed all the time. But then he heard something that made him stop. "Did you see him yesterday?" One intern said loudly. "He actually walked up on stage like he knew what he was doing." "Maybe he thought he'd impress us," another replied. "A janitor playing piano? Come on," someone else chuckled. "I bet he hasn't touched a piano in his life." Ethan pretended not to hear, but the words settled heavily in his chest. He didn't want to feel embarrassed. He didn't want to feel small. But hearing the way they spoke about him made him realize something. People didn't just see him as someone who cleaned. They saw him as someone who didn't belong anywhere near that stage. Yet, strangely, instead of making him want to hide, their words ignited something inside him. A quiet determination. During his break, Ethan stepped outside and sat on a bench behind the building. He closed his eyes and let the cool air calm him. For a moment, he imagined himself playing again, not for anyone else, not for applause, just for the simple feeling of his fingers moving across the keys. He missed that feeling more than he thought. When his break ended, he returned to work, but he carried a new energy. He pushed his cart with purpose, moved faster, cleaned carefully. His thoughts were clearer now. He didn't know how or when, but he suddenly felt the urge to play again. Not in front of the interns, not in front of a crowd, just for himself. Later that afternoon, the auditorium needed cleaning again. Workers had set up more things for the event, and decorations were scattered everywhere. When Ethan entered, the room was empty, except for the soft hum of lights and the piano it sat on the stage like it was waiting. He didn't plan to go near it. He just wanted to clean the space and leave. But with each step he took, the piano seemed to pull him closer. "Dad?" Ethan turned. Leo stood at the door, having arrived early from school again. "Can I wait here?" the boy asked. "Of course," Ethan said. Leo walked inside and took a seat in the front row, swinging his legs gently. He watched his father with curious eyes. As Ethan swept the floor, his gaze kept drifting toward the piano. After a while, he set his broom aside. Leo leaned forward a little. Are you going to try again? Ethan didn't answer right away. He walked slowly toward the stage. His steps echoed through the empty hall, filling the silence. When he reached the piano, he touched it the same way he did before, lightly, carefully, almost afraid. He lifted the lid. This time he didn't hesitate. He pressed one key. A soft, warm note filled the room. Leo's eyes lit up instantly. Ethan pressed another key. And another. Slowly at first, then a little faster. His hands felt stiff, but the sound was familiar. It was like meeting an old friend again. He played a simple tune, one he remembered from years ago. His fingers stumbled, but he didn't stop. The tune flowed, uneven but beautiful in its own way. Leo smiled widely. "Dad, I didn't know you could play like that." Ethan laughed quietly. "I didn't know I still could." But the moment didn't last long. The door opened suddenly, and one of the interns stepped inside. When he saw Ethan on the stage, his eyebrows shot up. "Oh, wow," he said loudly. "Practicing for your big show?" Ethan stopped playing immediately and stood. The intern waved a hand. "Relax. I'm just messing with you. But seriously, don't touch that piano. It's for the performers." Ethan didn't argue. He nodded, closed the piano lid, and stepped down from the stage. Leo frowned, whispering, "He didn't have to say it like that." "It's fine," Ethan replied, forcing a smile. But inside, something shifted again. The way the intern spoke wasn't simply rude. It was a reminder of how people saw him. And yet, the few moments he played felt good. Really good. The rest of the day passed slowly. Ethan tried to focus on work, but the sound of the piano lingered in his ears. That one simple moment had reopened something he thought was locked away forever. As evening approached, he picked up Leo and walked outside with him. The sky was fading into soft colors, the air cool and calm. They walked quietly until Leo asked, "Dad, are you going to play again tomorrow?" Ethan looked down at him. Maybe. But deep inside, he already knew the answer. Later that night, after Leo had gone to bed, Ethan sat at the small kitchen table. Bills were stacked on one side, a half-finished cup of tea on the other. But his eyes weren't on either. They were lost in thought. He remembered his grandmother's words. Music isn't just sound. It's a part of who you are. He didn't realize how true those words were until now. Music wasn't just something he did. It was something he had lived. Something he had breathed. And maybe something he wasn't ready to let go of. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck. "What am I doing?" he whispered to himself. But even as he said the words, a small smile tugged at his lips. The next morning, when he got ready for work, he felt lighter. Not because his problems had disappeared, they hadn't, but because he had rediscovered a piece of himself. As he walked into the building, he glanced at the auditorium door. And, for the first time in years, he didn't walk past it without feeling something. Something warm, something hopeful. He knew he wasn't ready to play for anyone. He wasn't ready to be judged or laughed at. But he was ready for one thing, to play again. Even if it was just for himself. He clocked in, pushed his cleaning cart forward, and took a deep breath. Today would be different. He didn't know how. He didn't know why. But he could feel it. Something was coming. Something he wasn't expecting. And deep in his heart, he wasn't afraid of it anymore. The next few days passed with a strange mixture of routine and quiet. Excitement for Ethan. He continued doing his work as usual, cleaning hallways, wiping windows, emptying trash bins. But something inside him felt different. Almost as if a door he had kept locked for years had opened just a little. And behind that door was a version of himself he had forgotten. He didn't rush back to the piano again. Not right away. Every time he walked into the auditorium, he felt the temptation to step onto the stage and lift the lid. But he controlled himself. He was scared not of the piano, but of the memories that came with it. Still, the spark was there, and it grew a little brighter every day. Leo noticed the small change in his father, too. At home, Ethan hummed more often. Sometimes he tapped his fingers lightly on the kitchen table, almost like he was playing an invisible instrument. It wasn't something he did on purpose. It just happened. Leo smiled every time he saw it. "Dad," he said one night during dinner, "I think the piano makes you happy." Ethan looked up from his plate. "Yeah," he said softly. "It used to." "You should play again," Leo replied. "Not for anyone. Just for yourself." Ethan didn't answer, but his silence wasn't a refusal. It was a thought, a possibility. The gala was approaching quickly, and the building was busier than ever. Workers hurried back and forth, carrying equipment, decorations, and sound cables. Ethan had more to clean, more to organize, and more noise to move around. Yet somehow, through all the chaos, his mind kept drifting toward the piano. On one particularly busy afternoon, the auditorium was filled with people preparing for the event. Lights were being tested, chairs were being set up, and the sound system was being adjusted. Ethan walked in quietly, staying out of everyone's way as he cleaned the aisles. The grand piano stood in the center of the stage, uncovered and shining under the bright lights. A professional pianist hired for the gala was practicing nearby. His hands moved confidently across the keys, playing fast, complex music that filled the entire hall. People watched him with admiration. Some even recorded short videos on their phones. Ethan stayed far from the stage, sweeping slowly, listening silently. He wasn't jealous, but watching someone else doing what he once loved stirred something deep inside him, a mix of longing and sadness. At one point, the pianist took a break and stepped off the stage. He walked past Ethan without even noticing him. Ethan nodded politely anyway. "Sounds good," Ethan said quietly. The pianist didn't respond. Ethan continued working, trying to ignore the feeling in his chest. When the hall finally cleared for a short lunch break, Ethan took advantage of the silence. He approached the stage, but he didn't touch the piano this time. He simply stood there, looking at it from below, remembering the days when he used to sit in front of a similar one. He remembered the first time he ever played a full song by himself. He remembered the smile on his grandmother's face when she clapped proudly. He remembered the hours he spent practicing, dreaming of playing on big stages. He remembered losing all of it. The day he lost her, music had been tied so tightly to people he loved that picking it up again felt like opening wounds he wasn't sure had healed. "Dad?" Ethan blinked and turned. Leo had arrived early from school again, thanks to a half-day schedule. He walked down the aisle and joined his father near the stage. "You okay?" Leo asked. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "Just thinking." Leo looked up at the piano and whispered, "It's beautiful." "It is," Ethan agreed. "Will you play again today?" Ethan hesitated, but this time it wasn't fear stopping him. It was uncertainty. He didn't know if he wanted anyone else to hear. "Maybe after everyone leaves," he said. Leo nodded, satisfied with the answer. When Ethan returned to work, a group of employees entered the auditorium again. Among them were the same interns who had teased him days ago. They carried boxes of decorative flowers and placed them around the stage. One of the interns spotted Ethan sweeping near the front row. "Hey, didn't think you'd come back after your little performance the other day." Ethan stayed calm. "I wasn't performing." The intern smirked. "Looked like you were trying." Another added, "Yeah, must be tough cleaning floors when there's a shiny piano sitting right there." Ethan didn't reply. He didn't want an argument. Leo, however, frowned at them from his seat. One of the interns noticed him. "Relax, kid. "We're just joking." Leo didn't answer. He simply held his father's sleeve a little tighter. Ethan placed a gentle hand on his son's back. "It's fine," he whispered, but something inside him twisted, not in anger, but in frustration at how easily people judged others without knowing anything about their lives. He kept working until the entire hall was set up again. As evening approached, the workers slowly left. The lights dimmed. The building grew quieter. By the time dinner hour arrived, the auditorium was empty. Ethan stood in the center aisle with his cleaning cart. Leo sat quietly nearby, waiting. The silence settled over the room like a blanket. Ethan looked at the piano. For a long moment, he didn't move. His heart beat faster, but not with fear, with longing. "Dad?" Leo said softly. "Nobody's here." Ethan nodded. He walked toward the stage. This time, there was no hesitation. He climbed the steps slowly, almost like he was entering a sacred place. He pulled out the stool, sat down, and lifted the lid. The keys glowed under the dim lights. Leo sat up straight, excitement in his eyes. Ethan placed his hands on the keys and closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. He began to play. The first few notes were shaky. His fingers felt stiff, and his rhythm wasn't perfect. But the melody he remembered from years ago slowly found its way back. The hall filled with soft, warm music. Not loud, not powerful, but honest. Note by note, his confidence grew. His fingers loosened. His hands remembered shapes, patterns, movements they hadn't made in years. The song he played wasn't one anyone knew. It was something he wrote long ago, during a time when life felt full of hope. When music was his escape, Leo listened with wide eyes, amazed by the sound echoing through the empty hall. He had never heard his father like this, so focused, so gentle, so full of emotion. Ethan didn't notice time passing. He didn't notice anything except the notes flowing from him. It felt like breathing. It felt like coming home. He played until the last note faded naturally into the air. When he opened his eyes, Leo was almost at the edge of the stage. "That was beautiful," Leo whispered. Ethan smiled softly. "Thank you. You should play like that all the time." "I don't know about that," Ethan said, shaking his head lightly. "But you can." Leo insisted. Ethan looked down at his hands, surprised at how steady they felt now. "Maybe I can." Just then, a soft sound echoed from the back of the hall. Ethan turned. Someone was standing near the doors. At first, he thought it was one of the interns, but then he recognized the person. It was a woman he had seen only occasionally, someone important. Someone with an office on the top floor. She was the CEO. Ethan's stomach dropped. He stood up quickly. "I'm sorry, I was just..." But before he could finish, the CEO raised a hand gently. "I heard you playing," she said in a calm voice. "Please don't stop on my account." Ethan felt his face warm. "I didn't mean to touch anything. I was just waiting for my son." "I shouldn't have..." "You should," she said softly. "You absolutely should." Ethan blinked, unsure what to say. The CEO walked closer, her eyes still gentle. "Do you know how rare it is to hear music that feels real?" she asked. "Not perfect, not polished, just real." Ethan swallowed. "It's been a long time." "Well," she said, "I'm glad you decided to play again tonight." Leo looked proudly at his father, as if he already knew this moment would come. The CEO smiled at Leo, then back at Ethan. "You have a gift," she said. "Don't hide it." Ethan didn't know what to say. He simply nodded. The CEO gave a small nod in return, then quietly left the auditorium. When the door closed, silence filled the room again, only this time it didn't feel empty. Leo climbed onto the stage and hugged his father's arm. "Dad," he whispered, "she liked it." Ethan placed a hand on his son's back. "Yeah, he said softly. I guess she did. They stood there for a moment. Letting the quiet settle. Ethan didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if playing the piano again would change anything. But for the first time in a long time, he felt seen. Not as a janitor, not as a background worker everyone ignored. But as someone who still had something inside him worth sharing. And that feeling stayed with him long. After he closed the piano lid and walked out of the hall with Leo by his side. Part 4 is being written. The story continues here in simple, natural, human-centric language, following the same tone as previous parts. Full content inserted below. He stood on the small backstage platform, his hands still trembling from what had just happened in the hall. The applause had been loud, louder than anything he had ever heard directed at him. It kept echoing in his ears, as if it was happening all over again. But now, in the quiet behind the curtain, everything slowed. He could hear the soft hum of the air vents, the steps of the crew moving equipment, someone whispering directions. All of it felt strange, like he was walking around inside a dream. He leaned against the wall for a second, letting out a long breath. His uniform shirt was still damp from working all day. His fingertips, slightly red from the keys, twitched with leftover energy. He closed his eyes. He could still feel the piano under his hands. The way the notes had moved, the way the music rose even though he had no sheet, only the memory of years spent practicing alone in quiet rooms. Excuse me? Are you all right? He opened his eyes. A woman from the event staff stood near him. She looked unsure, maybe even worried. He straightened up and nodded quickly. Yes, I'm fine. Just catching my breath. People out there are talking about you, she said softly. They're asking who you are. Some thought they were being pranked. But then, well, you saw their reaction. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being noticed. Usually, people didn't look twice at him. They saw the uniform, the mop, the gloves, and walked past. This sudden attention felt strange, too bright, almost unreal. He rubbed his hands together nervously. I hope I didn't cause trouble. I didn't mean to take up their time or anything. The woman shook her head. Trouble? You might have saved the evening. The CEO is still out there, wiping his eyes. People don't see him cry often. His heart jumped a little. He had noticed the CEO earlier. A man important enough that even janitors avoided crossing his path. He rarely smiled, always moved quickly, always surrounded by people saying yes to him. But the idea that his music had reached that man, it confused him, moved him, frightened him. He stepped away from the wall and looked at the curtain that separated him from the hall. The noise of people talking still drifted through. Some voices were excited, some surprised, some trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. I should probably go back to work, he said quietly. There are floors to finish and trash to collect. But before he could take a step, the curtain shifted. Someone walked through. It was the CEO. His suit was sharp, his hair neatly combed, but his expression looked softer than usual. There was a hint of redness around his eyes, but not the kind that made someone look weak, more like someone who had felt something deeply. The janitor froze. His hands tightened by his sides. The CEO studied him for a long second, as if trying to understand how a man in a worn uniform could make music that carried so much emotion. You, the CEO said finally, played that? He nodded, unable to find his voice. Where did you learn to play like that? The CEO asked. The janitor hesitated. He looked down at the floor, not out of shame, but because he wasn't used to talking about himself. My father played. I used to watch him. And after he passed, I kept practicing, mostly at night. I had an old keyboard at home. Nothing special. The CEO looked surprised. Not special? What you just did out there. It wasn't just talent. It was skill, control, emotion. You played like someone who lives inside the music. The janitor shrugged slightly. Music was the only place I felt. Clear, like I wasn't struggling. Like I could breathe without thinking. He paused. I didn't think anyone would ever hear it. Not like that. The CEO stepped closer, his voice lower now, calmer. When you were playing, I remembered something I haven't felt in many years. My mother used to play piano. Not professionally, but with heart. Listening to you brought her back to me for a moment. He swallowed. That's why I cried. The janitor blinked slowly. He felt something warm rising in his chest. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected any of this. Sir? I didn't know, he said gently. Of course you didn't. But you should also know this. The CEO took a small breath. People in that hall tonight, many of them have heard some of the best pianists in the world. But none of them gave them what you did. You gave them honesty. The janitor felt his face grow warm. I'm just a worker, sir. I was only trying to help earlier when they asked me. I didn't mean to make a scene. You didn't make a scene, the CEO said. You made an impact. Silence settled between them for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with meaning. The CEO glanced toward the hallway. Some guests want to meet you. Reporters too, I think. Word travels fast these days. But before I take you out there, I want to ask you something first. He looked him in the eyes, and his voice softened. Do you want any of this? The attention. The questions. The spotlight. The janitor hesitated. He thought about his son at home, waiting for him. He thought about the bills sitting on the table. He thought about the long nights spent mopping floors to keep everything together. But he also thought about how the piano felt under his hands. How playing gave him a feeling he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. I don't know, he said honestly. I'm not used to people looking at me. I just know I love playing. That's all. The CEO nodded with understanding. Then we'll take this slowly. I won't push you into anything, but I want you to meet some people tonight. People who can help you if you want something more. Opportunities don't always come twice. The janitor's heart beat a little faster. Opportunities. The word felt big. Almost too big to hold. But first, the CEO said gently, I want to thank you. The janitor looked confused. Thank me? Yes. The CEO's voice grew warmer. For reminding all of us what real music sounds like. For reminding me of my mother. For giving everyone something beautiful without asking for anything back. The janitor lowered his head slightly, humbled. I wasn't trying to make anything happen. I just played. Sometimes, the CEO replied, the things we do without trying are the things that matter most. The janitor let out a slow breath. He didn't know what his life would look like tomorrow, or even after the next hour. But right now, standing in the quiet backstage area with the world waiting just beyond the curtain, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. When the CEO gestured toward the hall, the janitor hesitated for only a moment before following. He didn't know what the guests would say. He didn't know if people would question why a janitor dared to sit at the piano. But he did know one thing, whatever happened next. His life was changing. And for the first time in a long time. He wasn't afraid of that dot as they walked toward the bright lights. He heard the sound of the piano replaying in his mind. Not as an echo this time, but as a promise. A promise that something new was beginning. Part 5 is being written. The hallway outside the grand hall buzzed with voices, footsteps, and the soft ringing of phones as people tried to explain what they had just witnessed. The janitor stood near the edge of the crowd, unsure of where to put his hands or what expression to wear. His uniform felt even older now, the fabric stiff from long days of work, but he tried not to think about that. He tried to breathe slowly, to steady himself. The CEO stayed beside him, guiding him gently whenever someone approached. He didn't push him forward or force him into conversations. Instead, he offered support the way a steady hand might guide someone walking across uneven ground. "Are you ready?" the CEO asked quietly. The janitor nodded, even though he wasn't entirely sure. But something inside him whispered that this moment was important, even if he didn't fully understand why. A small group gathered around them, guests still, dressed in sleek suits and glittering dresses. But when they looked at him, their expressions were not sharp or dismissive. Instead, they looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and appreciation. "You're playing." "It was unbelievable," one woman said. Her voice warmed out. Another man nodded eagerly. "I've attended events all over the world, heard famous performers. But the way you played, there was something special in it. Something real." The janitor felt his face heat up. Compliments were not something he received often. Most days, the only words spoken to him were instructions. "Clean that spill. Empty that bin. Finish this before shift change." But hearing people praise something he once hid away made his heart feel strangely full. He smiled shyly. "Thank you. I wasn't expecting anyone to hear me tonight." A few people exchanged glances, almost embarrassed. "We shouldn't have laughed," one man admitted. "I thought you were joking when you sat at the piano. But when you started playing, I realized how wrong I was." The janitor didn't respond with anger or bitterness. He simply said, "It's all right," because he truly meant it. He hadn't played to prove anyone wrong. He had played because, for a moment, he wanted to feel alive. After several more people spoke to him, the CEO gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let's give him some space," he said to the group. "He's had a long day." They moved aside, letting the janitor breathe again. "Thank you," he said softly. "You don't have to thank me," the CEO replied. "You did something incredible tonight." The janitor took a slow breath. "I need to go home soon. My son is waiting. He'll wonder why I'm late." The CEO nodded. "Of course. But before you do, there's someone I want you to meet." He gestured toward a man standing near the far corner of the hall. The man wore a long coat and carried a folder under his arm. He didn't look like a guest, more like someone who worked quietly in the background but held important responsibilities. As they approached him, the man smiled. "I heard the performance from the corridor," he said. "I wasn't even supposed to be near the hall tonight, but the music pulled me in. I had to see who was playing." The janitor nodded politely. "It was just something I learned over the years. Nothing professional." The man raised a hand. "Don't say that. I work with artists all the time, musicians, composers, performers. And what you did was not something ordinary. You have a gift." The janitor blinked slowly, unsure of how to respond. The man opened his folder and pulled out a card. He handed it over. "I'd like to invite you to a small session this weekend. Nothing formal. Just a private room with a good piano where you can play. I'd like to hear more from you. And if you're open to it, maybe we can discuss something larger afterward." The janitor stared at the card. The man's title was printed in clean, bold letters. He worked for a respected music organization, one known for discovering talent. His hands trembled slightly as he held the card. I don't know," he whispered. "I have work, and my son, and bills. I can't just leave everything." The man nodded with understanding. "I'm not asking you to leave anything. Just come for 1 hour. Let's see where this goes. If you want to stop afterward, no pressure. But if you want more, I promise we'll help you find a way. The janitor lowered his eyes, thinking. He pictured his small apartment, the stack of envelopes on the table, the late-night shifts, the quiet moments when everyone else slept, and he played softly so he wouldn't wake his boy. For years, music had been something he only allowed himself in tiny, hidden moments. A private world, a secret joy, but maybe it didn't have to stay hidden. Okay, he said quietly. I'll come. The man's smile widened. Good. I'll send you the details. They exchanged polite words before the man walked away. The CEO turned to the janitor. How do you feel? He asked. Scared, the janitor admitted. But also hopeful. That's a good combination, the CEO said with a soft laugh as the hall emptied and people said their final goodbyes. The janitor slipped away from the noise. He walked down the service corridor toward the staff room where his things waited. The hall lights grew dimmer behind him, fading into the background. When he finally stepped outside, the night air was cool against his skin. He held his small bag in one hand and the card in the other. Streetlights glowed softly along the road, and cars passed by with quiet hums. He began the walk home. His steps were slow, thoughtful. His mind drifted to his son, the little boy who often asked him, Dad, why don't you play piano for people? And every time he had answered, because it's not my place. But tonight had shown him something he had never let himself believe. Maybe it was his place. When he reached his building and climbed the old staircase to their apartment, he unlocked the door quietly. The small living room was dim, but a soft glow came from the bedroom. His son lay on the bed, half asleep but waiting. Dad, you're late, the boy whispered. I know, the janitor said gently, sitting beside him. Something unexpected happened at work. The boy blinked slowly. Did something bad happen? He shook his head. No, something good. The boy's small hand reached for his. You look different. The janitor chuckled softly. Maybe I feel different. The boy yawned and rested his head against his father's arm. I like when you play the piano. You smile when you do. You never smile when you mop floors? The janitor felt a lump rise in his throat. He stroked his son's hair gently. Would you like to hear something? He asked, even half asleep. The boy nodded. The janitor walked to the corner of the room where the old keyboard sat, the one missing 2 buttons, the one that crackled when turned on. He reached out and pressed the switch. The light flickered but stayed on. He sat down, placed his fingers on the keys, and began to play the same melody he had played at the event. But here, in this small room, it felt different, softer, more personal, more honest than ever. His son listened, eyes slowly closing, comforted by the familiar sound. The music filled the tiny apartment, not grand or polished, but warm and full of heart. When he finished, he sat still for a moment. The night breeze slipped through the cracked window, carrying the last note gently into the dark. His son whispered, barely awake, Dad, you should play for more people. The janitor smiled. Maybe I will, he said softly. He turned off the keyboard, tucked his son under the blanket, and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. The business card was still in his pocket, pressing lightly against his side, reminding him of the road he might soon walk. A janitor, a father, a man who had lived quietly for too long, and now a man who had been heard. He stood, looked at the small keyboard one more time, and whispered to himself, This is just the beginning.